this presentation is called Possible Solution because every time I thought that I had like general formula of successful automation and applied to the new project, I always failed. And that's why it's a possible solution. It's like sets of experiences up to this point, and maybe you will have some projects that these points will not apply, and you will need to use these suggestions and adapt to your workplace. So, first point is to, you should not always agree with supervisors and team about automating everything. And maybe you should not agree with yourself because you may have some temptation to automate every test case, but later on you will find that there is some maintenance cost and it didn't worth it. So yes, when I first saw this kind of demo of test automation, I also wanted to automate everything, and I would not touch some test cases manually again. But that's not reality. Sadly, most of the managers and non-technical people think like that with test automation, and they don't understand the technical details. And since you are, if you are a test automation engineer, you should decide what to automate and what not. So, yes, the question you may have is that so if we cannot automate everything, what can we automate? And there are some general suggestions about this. So we can, I can tell you briefly, but there are some sheets you can calculate metrics, which functionality is worth automating, and then you will automate. But briefly, it's about you should take the features that has highest customer risk, highest impact on customers. It should be easy to write and easy to refactor. And in a case of the defects and bugs, it should be highest priority to be fixed as soon as possible. So you should take most critical features of the application and automate only these features. But later on, you can add maybe low priority test cases as well. Second one is that actually previous presentation talked about limitations of BDT already, and yeah, it's kind of similar point that you don't have to use Gherkin or Cucumber if you don't really need it. Cucumber and Gherkin is for business people, for maybe non-technical people, and if they will be involved in the test automation process, you can implement using Cucumber Gherkin format, so it's written in English, like you are telling so this test automation framework what to do in English, and it can be understood by everyone. In this case, you can use Gherkin if business people will be involved in test automation, but reality is that they will not most of the cases. So it will be overhead and maintenance cost of this human language, human-friendly specification language format is like it has high maintenance cost, and if you don't really need it, just because you can, you should not use it. Next one is that we can use API tests with UI tests, so that the tests are not depending on each other. So in the previous example, in the demo, we had such scenario that this test automation were paying successfully and then checking the entries were added in transactions and current orders page. But this is not good design. Yeah, it's my fault. It should be like it should be split in 3 different test cases. For example, paying successfully should be one case, then paying with API quickly and checking that entry is added in current order should be another case, And the third case should be, again, paying with API quickly, and then checking assertions on different page. So these three test cases should not be dependent on each other, because in the flow, if something fails in the beginning, the below test cases cannot be tested. So if it's a non-dependent test, it's better, and also you can then distribute it to several browsers, and you can have results faster. Yeah, we should use API testing with UI testing, so that we're not creating like long specification of test automation, and smaller test cases are depending, and maybe vice versa. Like critical, the test case may depend on the low priority test case, because of if low priority test case fails in this flow, test automation flow, we cannot check a high priority test case. So if it's, if it's like non-dependent, it's better. Next one is, what's happening? Next one is it's again about distributed testing. And like we saw in demo, distributed testing is main benefit of test automation. If we are not using distributed testing with test automation, we are not gaining any. We still need some time. Maybe it's faster than manual testing, but it's like manual testing, but done with computer. And what's so distributed testing is really the point of test automation, and we will get results faster, and this is what's all about. So fast cookie authorization is a bit of a technical term, but it means that lots of test cases may need like login functionality at first to be logged in, and then check some functionality inside the application. So so that we are not logging several times. Maybe we have some 1,000 test cases, and for each of them, if we log in, the time increases, and this time does not give us anything. So fast cookie authorization is for is to log in with API and get cookies from API response and inject it to the browser. Some of the application does not allow this to happen, but we can always talk with developers, and if it's about reducing time of test automation, it's really the important point. So next one is about Flaky Tests. If you have some automated tests already in your project, we all know Flaky Tests. Like sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work, and we are not sure why it's not working and why it's not working. Maybe it's a case for manual testing as well. Sometimes we're testing it works, and sometimes it does not work. And actually, these kind of tests are not bad. It's annoying, but they are not bad, because they are showing us two different things. Like maybe infrastructure has some issues, and services are not available at the time of testing. Or the second issue, maybe the test flow of automated tests does not include edge cases, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it does not work. And this kind of tests gives us the option to improve, we find some different edge cases, so our knowledge about application grows, and it also gives us like a point to maybe we need to check infrastructure or services that are flaky. We are mad about this kind of tests, because they are telling us how bad we are, and that is why we don't like flaky tests. But if we use them like indication of what we need to do next, so that our application is more stable, these kind of tests are important as well. Next point is to choose right selectors. So selectors are the main building blocks for test automation, and so we are putting actions on some HTML or CSS objects in the web page or in mobile application, and without selectors, if selectors are flaky, maybe they are not unique, test automation will not be trusted. And that's why it's important to choose right selectors. One way to do this is to think in the future. If some button or field has a unique CSS selector today, you have to think maybe in future there might be a similar button or similar field, and you have to take it into consideration that this selector uses as many parameters so that it's unique as the time goes, and test automation doesn't break. So selectors should be unique. That's the suggestion. Next one is about communication. With test automation, sometimes when you run test automation suite and some test cases fail, then we found out that these test cases should be failing because there were some changes in application requested by business analysts or stakeholders, and this failing test cases is like a good case. But it's better to know beforehand, before we run this test automation suite, if there are some changes in existing functionality of application. It's better to know beforehand and note that which test cases fails or which will be succeeded. Yes. I think I finished like early, but I can talk. I can talk more about some of the cases, yeah. This is a picture of successful test automation, because when you have successful test automation, you're like sitting on a desk, and this robot computer tells you what succeeded and what not. And this should be our end goal. End goal should be that test automation framework is trustworthy, so that developers and business analysts trust this framework, and so we can make sure that test automation is trusted with these suggestions I had I discussed before, and if your test automation is trusted by everyone, that means it's successful, and it doesn't need to be checked manually again, and you can release it to the production more quickly. Then you can integrate with CI/CD and run on different browsers, on running cloud, on running wherever you want, which is not possible doing manually, and yeah, everyone is happy. Okay, that's
yeah. Thank you for suggested ideas and solution for automation, but can you suggest cases when it is not worth to automate? It is better to not automate.
Yes. For example, we may have some application that has navigation as a main part, so that maps and loading is important, maybe writing application, and in that case, automating maps and navigation routes is important, but it's really hard to do, and in this case it's worth automating. But maybe some other application has additional feature for showing map of their markets or something, and it's not from the start. It's not application for the navigation. In that case, we may rethink about if it's worth automating, because it's really hard to automate navigation, and yeah, these are different cases. It depends on the application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thanks for your great presentation. I want to ask you, when are you automating all this stuff? For example, if you are working as an agile team and it's not involved in agile process, it's not planned, and what's the time when you automate it?
This should be involved in agile process. And
but then product owners are not happy because it slows down the process. And
why it does not? Like, imagine you have new sprint with new features, new stories, and on the current new sprint, you can work on the on the functionalities that are created in the previous sprint that are already stabilized. So it's you cannot automate the new feature in the new sprint because it's not stabilized, and it may have some bugs. And if you are automating the feature with bugs, it's like your automation is buggy as well. So it's yeah, you should take features from the last sprint and automate in the current sprint.
Hi, I would like to ask you how frequently you meet the case when the functionality fails, like when one of the automated tests fails. How frequently is a failure of the test, not the functionality itself?
In my case, it's not happening much anymore because I'm like experienced with choosing right selectors I had in slide. So mostly it's about selectors. Like sometimes you are choosing selector, the same selector that has several objects in the page, and automation does not know which one to click or which one to input some information. And it's so automated tests to be stable. It's critical to have stable unique selectors, and that way, if test fails, it will be issue of the application and not the automated test.
And one more thing, like you mentioned that not all the functionality should be automatically tested. If you could give an example of, for example, a basic functionality which should be always tested manually and not automated.
Can you repeat?
If you have any example when test should be always manual and not be automated, as you mentioned, because not all the tests should be automated.
Yes, maybe in a Tbilisi mobile application case, we have when you are paying something, you get SMS code that you need to enter in the field, and then you are able to pay. So this kind of automation is not possible. It should be automated with hand, and because this message is sent to sent with some message system, and it only gets to the user's device. In this case, you should automate with hand, and there are so many examples. But like, it's hard to automate. Maybe you have some functionality with cameras, like scanning the QR code, scanning the barcode. It is possible to automate, but then you need to set up the device and point to the same QR all the time. And when you run test automation, this device should be like you are depending on the third-party physical things as well, and that's not a good thing to automate.
Thank you.
Any other question?
No.
Well, we have one more question.
First, thanks for your presentation. And can you tell us a little about tool, which was at the beginning of the slide? And second question is, do you think that manual testing is fully replaceable by automation testing in future?
Okay. This tool was Selenite and Java. So there are many libraries compiled into the one project, like JUnit for test running, Elure for reports we've seen, Java and Selenite mainly. And the second question, I think, what do you mean by future? If you mean like maybe 10 years, it's not. If you mean maybe 100 years, it is. Because
No, nearly future.
near future, we can get to the 99%, but not 100. Because there are some AI tools, Apply tools, if you know, that are checking the screen and compare it to the, it's hard to explain. It's AI tool. AI says anything, everything. So it's easier for us to automate.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question? Okay. No, thank you, Papuna.